I was still adjusting to a move across the country and a new job. In the past few months, I've made a habit of buying lunch for a boy named Catfish. Before I met him, I never believed in supernatural things. But after a trip in the Bayou, I was forced to see there were some things beyond natural in the world. Somehow that fact didn't shake my view on life. I carried on like normal. As long as I stayed away from those supernatural threats, I would be safe. At least, that's what I assumed. 2 days a week, I would spend my lunch break with Catfish, who was, well, a catfish. He appeared human, but I knew he was something else. Maybe not just a fish, but something more dangerous. Because I bought him food, we became friends. He promised to protect me if I did slip up and come across something unnatural threatening my life. He was such a powerful thing in a small body. I never needed to worry about losing a fight. Again, that's what I thought. On my lunch break, I was at our usual spot. Catfish hadn't shown up yet, and I was worried about it. He never missed out on getting free food. The only time we didn't meet is if my job got in the way. As the minutes passed, I grew more anxious about him. He didn't own a cell phone, and there was no way to contact him to see if he was alright. Just as it felt as though my nerves were going to get the better of me, a man stopped beside my table. At a glance, it was obvious he knew Catfish, and he wasn't human. His hair was long and unkempt, eyes so light it looked as if they didn't have any color to them, stared me down. He was wrapped up in a blanket, torn and dirty, and bare feet stuck out from under the sheet. He gave me a cold stare, face somewhat hidden behind his hair. Oddly enough, it felt as if I've seen him before, but couldn't place his face. "Catfish is in trouble. You need to save him. Follow me." Giving me no time to respond, he turned and started away. My stomach sank. Images of that kind boy flashed through my mind as I got up, stumbling over my own feet, in a rush to follow this man. I walked into work saying a family emergency came up, and I needed the rest of the day off. Since I've yet to miss a day, my boss let me call in on short notice. I kept asking the stranger questions about Catfish and what was going on, but he didn't respond. Instead, he paused and looked me over, with a face that could freeze fire. "Do you own a car?" I nodded, and this time, he followed me. It was only a short walk back to the office, and yet each second passed impossibly slowly. When we got to my car, he sat in the passenger seat. Again, not speaking much. Other than giving me directions, he refused to answer any important questions. We drove to a small dock with a rowboat at the end. He stood in the front of the boat facing away, keeping perfect balance as I swayed the small craft getting in. The moment both my feet were on the wood, the boat started to glide down the water on its own. After what happened the last time I was in the Bayou, I wasn't keen on entering it again. My stomach twisted in stress and fear. I wished the boat would go faster, so I could find my small friend and hopefully get him out of trouble. I didn't understand what I could even do. I was human and felt helpless against any supernatural threat. The boat steered through narrow waterways. The bayou around us was an amazing piece of nature, full of creatures and life I would never fully understand. It was still early in the afternoon, and yet the lights surrounding us looked golden, as if the sun was setting. I spotted Catfish before the boat reached him. It needed to steer around some wet but solid ground. The boy was on his back, covered by a dirty blanket on a soggy bank. I didn't wait for the boat. I jumped out, rushing towards him, finding it hard to move in damp ground. my shoes soaked and pants wet up to the knees. I pressed on, frantic. When I did reach him, I collapsed next to the sleeping boy, thinking the worst. Cat. What happened to him? I demanded up at the man who stopped beside us. Catfish was pale, his breathing weak and ragged. The blanket covering the frail boy, stained by what I feared to be blood. The man looked almost emotionless, not affected by my outburst. He was attacked by a creature. They tore out an organ for who knows what reason. He's tough, but can't hold on for more than a day or so, the man said in a low voice. He sounded angry, but it was easy to see that he was upset at himself for not protecting Catfish. Lifting the boy into my lap, I shuddered over how cold he felt. I placed a hand on his damp forehead, feeling as if I was going to burst. The reasons I moved across the country came flooding back, seeing him like this. I forced them all down to focus on what I could do. We need to get him to a hospital. The man shook his head. If it was that simple, he could have already done it. For some reason, he brought me here. That was a hopeful sign. I would do anything to save this kind kid. There is a creature that lives deep in the bayou. She can make something to heal him. However, she does not exchange with other supernatural things. I can bring you to her, he explained. Put him in the boat and we'll go right now. The man shook his head at what I said. I heard a noise from Catfish and kept brushing his hair out of his face, trying to soothe him. No, he must stay here. The place we are going is dangerous. You might not even make it. I cannot watch over him and you at the same time. I hated leaving Catfish behind while he was suffering. I understood why we needed to do so, and I didn't have anyone I could call to watch the boy for me. If I called my partner, he would rush Catfish off to a hospital right away. Don't. A small voice came from the boy in my arms. I was glad he was strong enough to speak, but hearing his voice broke my heart. I wanted to kill whatever did this to him. Instead of looking as if he was in pain, the boy smiled up at me. It wasn't his usual wide smile, and that made my chest tighten. Turner, it's fine. Don't risk your life for me. It's not fine. There's no way we're leaving you to die like this. He looked up with a strained expression. He knew I wasn't going to back down, and the last thing he wanted was a friend to get hurt for his sake. The thought of someone dying for him may hurt him more than having an organ ripped out. I'll protect him. I'm strong enough for that now. I don't need to rely on your strength, so this man shall not die on your behalf. The man stood confident in our mission. Catfish did not appear to share the same thoughts. He closed his eyes and let out a sigh, knowing he couldn't stop us. Please, just come back alive, no matter what. I promised him we would. Speaking drained Catfish of his strength, and he fell asleep again. I gave him a few moments to rest, before lifting him to place the boy under a tree, hoping it was a better spot instead of his legs being in the water. The man silently watched as I promised Catfish again. I would save him and placed a kiss on top of his head. I was facing an entire bayou of supernatural creatures far beyond my power and understanding. I barely knew anything about this area, because I'd recently moved from a colder part of the country. This trip would truly be venturing into the unknown. I turned to face the mystery man, ready to press forward, and not wanting to waste any more time. He gave me a nod and led me back to the boat. I could do nothing but sit as we started to go further and deeper into the bayou, and into a swamp. As we drifted along, it got darker and darker. The man took a thick stick from the bottom of the boat and wrapped some fabric around the end to make a torch. After he lit it, he stood at the front of the boat again, the fire lighting our way. Due to the darkness, it was impossible to see past the firelight. I heard things chattering off in the dark, and splashes of water around us. My handgun at my hip, I felt jumpy, ready to draw it. A gun might not be much against the monsters in this place, but it was better than nothing. Finally, the boat hit land, and we got off onto the damp ground. My feet sank every step. Hyper aware of everything around me, I followed the stranger, being guided by the faint light. The man hadn't introduced himself, and the feeling of seeing him before never faded. It was either solving that mystery or letting the fear of the dark take over. "Have we met before?" I asked in a low voice. "No." He didn't even take his attention off the path. I knew his face, but not his voice. A twig snapped and I couldn't see what caused it. Because my guide didn't seem worried, I didn't stop walking. My palms felt sweaty from stress. I just wanted to hurry and save Catfish, but we remained at a slow walking speed. "You have a gun, correct? Do not use it unless needed. It will not kill anything here. Just piss them off," he warned, then gave me a quick glance over his shoulder. "Do you work at the police station we took your car from?" That was a bit of an off-topic question. I nodded. He didn't elaborate on why he asked. Suddenly, I remembered why I knew this man when I thought of his face in the station. Every day I walked by his photo on the way to my desk, along with the photos of other fallen officers from that station. "You're Troy Gavin. What on earth are you doing in the swamp?" I blurted out. His pace stopped for a moment at my words before carrying on. At some point, this man was human and worked as a detective 2 years before I got the job. I heard some about his past, and it was slowly coming back in bits and pieces. He disappeared and was presumed dead. But there was a reason for that I was forgetting. "It's a long story," he started. "I have nothing else to do. I don't mean to pry if you don't want to tell me though," I commented with a shrug. Another glance as he decided to answer my questions. It was a sign that we were in a safer part of the bayou, if he was fine speaking so casually. "I worked as a detective in the same station you're at. Some little girls were being kidnapped and murdered. I was able to track down the murderer, but the problem was he was a priest. A combination of a good lawyer and his flock giving him a false alibi got him off the murders." We walked, Gavin's voice low in the oppressing darkness around us. The torch flickered and I started to feel a terrible pit of ice forming in my stomach. Details of the case I heard about came back to my memory, and I regretted asking Gavin about it. I knew what that priest did when he got off free. Gavin continued on regardless. "When he got out, he killed my 10-year-old sister. I felt cold and needed to stop walking." Gavin also stopped halfway, turned in my direction. His face had a hard expression on it. I never should have asked. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "I'm so sorry. I bet that lawyer and the people who vouched for him couldn't forgive themselves for helping a monster like that." For a moment, Gavin almost looked amused in the firelight. Something reflected off his finger, and for the first time I noticed a wedding band. He gave up a married, normal human life and turned into something else. I knew the priest was dead, but didn't hear the details on how that happened. New cops normally didn't get the lowdown on all the older cases, unless they were really interesting or relevant. "The lawyer quit. The ones who gave the false alibi had their lives ruined in some way or another. I could arrest the priest for my sister's murder, but I wanted everyone to suffer. I wanted that lawyer to lose everything. I wanted to torment him in the most painful way possible. In the end, I did so. I found the 3 words to say that would utterly ruin him. Swallowing the lump that formed in my throat, I almost didn't want the answer I asked for. A girl died, but that man was just doing his job. If he quit after, he might not have known that the priest was guilty, and just did what he was hired for. I didn't know how I felt about Gavin taking revenge on the man. "What did you say to him?" I asked in a strained voice. "I love you." My heart skipped a beat and my eyes went back to the wedding band. This man did the cruelest thing he could think of. By marrying the lawyer who felt responsible for his little sister's murder, instead of harassing him or physically assaulting the other man, he drove in emotional pain every time he looked at his new husband. I couldn't imagine being so heartless to do such a thing. When I didn't respond, Gavin turned to carry on. "I belong here. I was already a monster before Catfish showed me how to turn into one." His voice was low as we started walking again. I thought I heard some soft sounds under his voice, but replied before I started to try and find the source. "Did you come here because you feel guilty for what you did?" I asked, unable to keep the question unspoken. Suddenly, sound erupted from behind. It was something that didn't belong in a bayou. It was so foreign and unnerving. I couldn't help myself from turning around and trying to find out what was making it. It was clapping. Not scattered clapping, but rhythmic clapping. As if hundreds of people were all clapping at once in a beat only they knew. "Don't look at them," Gavin warned, but it was too late. When I looked, the darkness came away all at once. The bayou looked like it was at dusk, with enough light to see by. My eyes adjusted as I saw countless figures crowding between the mossy trees. They clapped but stopped the second my eyes landed on them. All stood frozen in time, hands raised similar to a prayer. Each and every one of these people were dead. Glossy blank eyes stared as the smell hit. Rotted flesh peeled away from bones, and clothing hung off their thin frames. My mouth opened to scream, but no noise came out, as all at once they rushed forward. A hand wrapped around my eyes, and Gavin grabbed around my shoulder from behind to draw me close. I felt the air rush past as those figures ran by, the clapping starting up again. As suddenly as it happened, it stopped. Gavin lowered his hands and went back to the still lit torch he dropped. I was still trembling and breathing hard, not understanding what I just saw. The light faded back to a darkness that made it impossible to see if there was more of the dead looking at us. "What?" I croaked out, unable to walk. Gavin took my arm and dragged my shaking body forward until I could take some steps on my own. He wasn't afraid in the slightest. That fact made dread spread throughout my entire body. I'd just witnessed the most frightening thing in my entire life, and it didn't even faze him. "That was just a tide. Don't worry about it. Unless you pay attention to them, you won't get swept up in it," he explained. "That, a tide? This place, can I ever understand anything about it?" I asked. He paused and shook his head. He could tell me everything about this side of the bayou, where he and Catfish lived, but I was human. I would never understand what creatures roamed and the reason for their existence. If I was lucky, that army of the dead would be the only thing we would come across. Unfortunately, I wasn't.